Hello, my friends. How are you? This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up. This podcast I started a few years ago. We're almost to 150 episodes, where I just sit down and chat with other writers. I have lovely conversations. Don't really plan out what I'm going to ask them. Don't really plan out what I'm going to talk to them about. And we usually don't talk about their books because I simply can't read all those books that get sent to me. So I want to find out about them. So it's always a journey for me, and I always feel like I come out of it like, oh, they had some really interesting points that I hadn't thought about before. So it's a great learning experience for me as a writer to be talking to all these amazing people. Before we get to today's guests, just a reminder that I have this great company called Unbound Writer that we are offering retreats, coaching, and writing retreats in Boulder, Colorado. We are offering one-on-one coaching services with me, and we are offering online courses, the first three of which are being launched right now. So please check out unboundwriter.com if you are an aspiring writer, struggling writer, established writer who's just looking for that extra motivation, and maybe somebody to give second opinions on what you are writing. So today I had on the show Lori Roy, and we had a fantastic conversation. So Lori Roy's actually her debut novel, Bent Road, was awarded the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best First Novel by an American Author. So Edgar Awards are a big deal. So that's really fantastic. And her work has twice been named a New York Times notable crime book and has been included on various best of and summer reading lists. So she just came out with, I believe, her sixth book, Lake County. And this is her first time publishing with Thomas and Mercer. Thomas and Mercer is owned by Amazon. So that presents a fully different kind of ability to reach customers, which we talked about a little bit in this. But we were similar in the sense that, we both had these corporate jobs, totally and completely and utterly unrelated to writing, or certainly in terms of fiction writing. And we just started writing. And in her case, she was taking some planned time off to help raise her first child. And she decided, all right, when I go back to work, whatever that work looks like, I am going to start now working towards building that future career. And she just decided that future career was going to be in writing. So a real conscious decision, which was kind of interesting. We went into the weeds on that a little bit as well, because that was fascinating to me to kind of say, this is what I'm going to do. Even as she says in the interview, all along, she never really actually believed that she would ever be published, much less had the success that she's had. So really good conversation, gritty little story that didn't quite get violent, that we made up at the end. This is my conversation with Lori Roy. Funny, like, you always want to write under, I think, my inclination was the same as yours. I want to write under my name. I like my name and just makes things easier. And like your point is well taken. If you want to switch genres, that's one consideration. Or if your books just aren't taking off, aren't doing anything.
Yeah.
You realize it becomes this real business decision, because your agent will tell you, well, publishers are going to look at your previous sales, and that can scare them off. But publishers, tend to go a little doe-eyed over a quote unquote debut, or at least a debut name. So and you're like, do I really want to change my name, or do I, and what if that doesn't work?
Yeah, well, I know a few out there who've changed it a few times.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess it's out there. But then you have to make sure you know the person's real name when you meet them, if you call them by the front.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's always the letters, right? This is JL. I'm like, well, do I call you JL? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're in Florida, is that right? Whereabouts in Florida?
In St. Petersburg, the Tampa
Okay.
Bay area.
Are you from there?
No, but I've lived here for 30 years.
Okay. So you've
So
seen Florida change quite a bit, I'm sure, over that time.
yeah, I have. And the
Yeah.
kind of the joke down here is that nobody is from Florida.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having been here for 30 years, kind of makes me a local. I
I
love
uh
it.
I lived in Miami for a couple years when in my 20s, and yeah, I don't miss it. It
Yeah.
was it was too much chaos for me. But
Well, it's definitely pretty steamy this time of year.
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure. So we're
yeah.
growing up in that area, were you, or not in that area, but just growing up, were you kind of this creative kid who always wanted to write, or was it something that visited you a little bit later in life?
I when I was very young, like maybe the 8, 10, um, I have book covers. Like I remember thinking, I'm going to sit down and write a book.
Uh-huh.
And then when I'm sure I got bored with that in about 10 minutes, and I
Hmm.
would make the cover. So I have the cover of books that I never wrote. Um, but then I went on to actually in college study finance and accounting. So
Oh,
I
yeah,
started out
I
as a
was a
tax,
finance person too.
yeah, yeah. I started out as a tax accountant.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, so no, I wasn't one of those writers who, from the day they were crawling knew they were going to be a writer. I've
Right.
always been a reader. I've always loved to read.
But you weren't taking the summer after college to recreate Jack Kerouac's Road Trip. And yeah, I'm the same way. I hospitality, hotel, real estate finance, and I did that for 30 years. But you know, 10, 15 years into that, I just started writing, and it was just this weird. I had no business doing it, basically. No
Yeah.
training, no nothing. And I wrote my first book in just a few months, and it was terrible. I mean, clearly, but it took me being curious about, like, why did that happen? Like, what was that? I'd never had anything like that happen to me before. So it took me to really focus on it. I'm like, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. I don't know, but I want to pursue it. What was your kind of moment?
Um, my moment was I was working in the corporate world. I started in public accounting and then I was at Hallmark Cards in their tax department and then a finance department. And my husband and I decided to move down to Florida. We just had
Mhm.
one child at the time. And so I was lucky enough to be in the situation where I could step away from the full-time job and be home with my one child at the time. And I decided I wanted to be building a career with those years that I would be at home.
Mhm.
And so I decided I'm going to write a book. And
Interesting.
I kind of like you, I don't know where that came from because other than having been a reader,
Right. And doing
I
those
knew
nice cover
nothing.
designs.
My cover design experience was tremendous. Um, I started out the first few years just on my own at my desk, reading books on writing and just writing.
Yeah.
And then I was very lucky that here in St. Petersburg, we have it's called Eckerd College, is a local college here. And Dennis Lehane and Sterling Watson started a writers conference.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was like it was literally 10 minutes from my house, Eckerd College. I lived down in that area. And the first year they had it, I chickened out and I didn't apply.
Uh-huh.
But the next year I got up my gumption and I applied, and that was my first kind of official being a student again, which I
Yeah.
loved. I
Interesting.
loved being a student. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes when it's around that energy of other writers, particularly if you haven't really done that, it's crazy, right? Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's other people who are like me, and they're all at different points in their careers, but it's very invigorating because you realize, like, oh, this is a real thing. People actually,
Yeah.
books don't just magically appear. Here are the people who are doing it, and sometimes that's a massive shot of adrenaline. Sometimes it's also very intimidating, and you're just like, it's so much. I'm curious, just because your approach to it is a little bit different than what I hear from most, because a lot of people are, they're working full time doing whatever, and they're starting to write, but they very quickly view it as almost belittle themselves in a way, like, oh, this is just a hobby. It's a stupid little thing that I'm doing. You're sitting there. And did you and your husband kind of have an agreement, like, okay, I'm going to take, X number of years off? Because it sounds like you had a predestined, like, because I'm going to build this, whatever career this is going to be in this time off. So you immediately, whatever you were going to choose, you saw it as building towards a career,
Mhm.
which is, I think, which is a monumental mind shift that's so important to do, because then you take it seriously.
Yeah. And, I guess all that said, I have to honestly say I never really thought I would get a book published.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
it's a long shot. Like, once you start reading about publishing, it's a long shot.
well, yeah. And I just kept, I again made my way to a really good conference first, and that led me to, others that were run similarly. And one of the great pieces of advice I got was to, as you're studying the craft of writing, make your writer friends, people who kind of want to work as hard as you do and who are motivated, and then throw everything you have into making their work better.
Hmm.
Because in doing that, you learn to be a better critic of
Right.
of work. You learn why, if something's not working, why does it not work?
Right.
And so
Right. Be
you
curious about
exercise.
why it's not working.
Yeah, because in figuring that out, you're learning about the craft of writing, and the more you do it, the better you're doing it with your own work.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so that was my focus. And I wrote a couple books, like you mentioned, that first one was no good. I had a couple of those that
Yeah. My first three didn't
people,
sell.
well, I didn't even try. People say they stuck them in a drawer. Mine
Yeah.
aren't even in a drawer. They're in a shredder. They're
Right.
they're mulch by now.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just kept trying to be a better, stronger writer. And then so yeah, I did set out to build a career for myself, and yet I never really thought about it actually getting published. That
Right.
other people did that, like
Right.
people that have real talent did that. um,
But it's a game, kind of, in a way, right? Like, so I got an agent with that first book, which, after maybe 75 rejections, I got an agent. Same agent actually I'm with 22 years later. Um, so that was enough of a foothold, to feel like, all right, somebody besides my immediate family has liked what I wrote. And they have stakes in it. But then it's followed by years and years and years, 3 books worth of rejections. But you just need these little moments where you're like, okay, there's something that made me go a little bit forward to make me think that it's possible. It's not probable. But I think at the end of the day, like, you would easily quit if you didn't love it. Like, if you didn't love the actual act of, like, crafting a story and the challenge and the problem solving around it, because it's so hard to write a book, and it's
yeah,
really hard to take all that rejection.
yeah, yeah. The whole thing's pretty much terrible, but we keep
Yeah.
doing it. um, and I what I really appreciated going through the process when I did, and I'm raising my kids, is everything I learned that I wanted to teach them about,
Hmm.
if you want something, you've got to be willing to keep trying.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to be like that first conference I went to, I was by far the least experienced writer in the room. Like
Hmm.
I was the one that kind of got giggled at occasionally.
That's interesting.
But it's
Huh.
like you got to be okay with that. Like because I had so much to learn. What a great, I
Yeah.
had a class of amazingly, they were MFA students. Michael Carita was in my first class.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Michael's work. He had maybe published one book then. He was very young, but like you can't let don't let your ego get in your way, whatever you pursue. Just
Right.
set your goals and keep at it.
Yeah, and it's an amazing accomplishment, and that your point is well taken about kind of what you're demonstrating to your children. Because my kids never had any kind of I never wanted them to be a writer. I would never hope that they would be a writer. They never expressed any interest to be. But like, I remember my son saying to me once a couple of years, he's like, "That's just so cool that you just like did this." And that just struck me because he's never said anything like that before. But I'm like, yeah, that is. You realize like I did this on my own. I didn't have any, you obviously have help when you're publishing, but in terms of, I didn't come from a family of writers. I just
Mm.
created this story and it's now out there in the world and all the blood, sweat, and tears that it went into making that happen. That does reflect on your kids and they will look at that and be like, that's pretty amazing. So that's a very rewarding moment when that happens.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is.
Had your how old are your kids?
One like mid-20s and one's 31.
Okay. So are they
But
and
that
are they
hurts.
readers of your books?
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
not.
My daughter is
I
my
could,
son is about halfway through the one book that I dedicated to him specifically.
yeah. You got to
I'm
guilt
like,
them into it.
the guilting doesn't even seem to, he's like, I'm almost halfway through. I'm like, it's been 2 years.
It's been 2 years. I will say they are big promoters of my work. Like they
Yeah.
go into their jobs and their lives, and um, so I'm good with that.
Yeah, it was. And the other thing is like when they're younger, at least it's they can wrap their head around an author. If you tell them like, oh, I'm a data consultant for the hospitality industry, they're like,
That means nothing.
but when they say like, oh, I told my friend you're a writer, they said that's so cool. I'm like, all right, that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But you
Oh,
can,
absolutely.
yeah, you can understand it. So what was that when you finally got to the book that became your debut? Was that the first time you had like gotten an agent, for example?
Yes, it
Yeah,
was. Um, just the good old fashioned query.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this was in 2009. So that, it was kind of just on the verge of starting to email, not as much as sending the, self-addressed stamped envelope world.
Right.
Um, so yeah, just slush pile.
Yeah, totally.
I had zero, like my tax experience meant nothing when it came to my
Of
query
course.
letter.
Of course. Of
Um,
course. I
yeah,
remember, yeah, I was 2003, so it was snail mail. And I remember like just thinking about the type of paper, the weight of the paper. Is this nice paper? Will they like, open this and feel
yeah,
like this is all, because it's just literally a single page. And I remember even in my query letter, because yeah, I wrote appraisal reports. So who
riveting.
cares? Right. And then so I kind of made the comment in my query letter. I'm like, some of which I consider to be fiction of the highest caliber. So I'm like, all right, maybe there's like I do know how to write, but like it doesn't matter. It's all you hope, please ask for 10 pages,
Yeah,
and then they reject you after so and it took me a year, I think, to get
yeah.
to finally land it. It's rough. So you get this agent, and how long did it take for that book to sell?
It sold, let's see. I'm trying to remember the timing. I remember when we signed, maybe it was in the spring, and there was a big publishing conference. I don't know if that what that would have been. And I remember my agent saying, let's wait till that's over, because everybody's out of the office and,
Yeah,
we don't want to get lost in the shuffle. And then she put it out via, I guess made phone calls and pitched it and did all that. And then it ended up selling at auction. So it
that's great.
sold like with, I don't know what, I'd have to kind of go back and look at all the emails. I remember her asking me, did I want to see the emails like that came back from the editors, whether they were interested or they were rejecting it. And I said, yeah, I want to see them. And there would be things like, Lori Roy auction on a certain day, and I had just had this vision of like the courthouse steps and the gavel going.
Right,
It
right,
was
right.
just all via the telephone.
Right. But
Um,
an auction,
but
just for the listeners, an auction's a big deal because obviously that means multiple parties are assumed to be interested, as opposed to sending it out to a publisher, getting a rejection, sending it out to another one, or maybe sending out to two at a time and just going through a long process. So an auction is exciting.
it was exciting, and it was I felt pretty certain that it wasn't going to sell and my career was over before it began. Um,
Yeah, you have the
Boy, I
author's
had
mentality for sure.
well, sure. I'm on book 6, and I still think it was just a fluke that I ever finished a book.
Totally. That's how I feel. And I'm on
Yeah.
book 10.
Okay, well, kindred spirits. I think we all are that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do coaching as well, and I talk a lot about imposter syndrome because it is a real thing, and it can be helpful in a sense of like it does kind of make you shed your ego, because you kind of feel like I don't have any right to be doing this, so let me just do it out of like this sense of pure joy and love for the craft, and have zero expectations. But it can also be debilitating, right? Because you can have such a lack of confidence that it does permeate how you talk about yourself, how you present yourself to the world, and all that. I energy wise, I do think makes a difference. I mean, I
Yeah.
wasn't comfortable actually calling myself a writer, say like at a cocktail party, until my third book hit the USA Today bestsellers list. And I'm like, that's the when I first would, but I would
It's
never say
time.
that I was a writer first. I would always say my other job, which nobody gave a shit about. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, and so I would always diminish it, right? And you realize over time, you're like, no, you have to really look at this. This is who you are. Why would you hide from that? But even writing my first book, I didn't tell anybody. I was embarrassed. I was like, I felt like a fraud. It's
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It,
Do
it
you go
is.
through that?
Um, yeah, but when I've done some teaching, and I find myself often comparing studying to be a writer to being a great tennis player. And like, maybe the greatest tennis player ever, or one of them, Roger Federer, was one
Mhm.
time asked, "What are you going to work on this year in your training?" So he's talking about his whole year's plan. And in his whole year, he was going to work on his short cross court backhand slice.
Wow.
For a
That was the
year, he
focus.
was he was going to work on that one shot. And you don't do that during a match. You do that with hours and hours and hours of
Right.
training and focus. And I'm gonna work to get better and not be comfortable. And so that's kind of how I approached writing,
Yeah.
is that I wanted to exercise those skills. Um, and yeah, like I didn't really think other people published books, so I didn't really even think necessarily that would happen. But it's another tennis story I have. I don't have to go through another tennis story, but there's a lot of value in that because you really don't have to believe you can do it. You just have to keep trying.
Right. Right.
That
Right.
was so yeah, I just kept trying. And
But that belief is in there somewhere if you're telling yourself to keep trying, and maybe that manifests itself just in terms of tenacity or spite or whatever, like god damn it, I'm going to have this one book published even if it kills me.
yeah,
There is a belief in there somewhere. But that tennis analogy is interesting because I think what non-writers maybe don't, I don't know, appreciate as much or realize as much is that we do have to kind of keep working on things. Like we don't publish our first book and be like, okay, this is our skill set as a writer right out of the gate, and it will always hover around this area. You get better, or I like to think you get better over time because you do start to recognize, all right, I'm going to spend this year working on my dialogue or working on something where I think I'm not as good as I am in other areas.
Yeah.
So book number 6, and I know you've had to have some very heady awards. I would venture to guess your confidence around your writing in book 6 is higher than where it was around books 1 and 2.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you?
Well, maybe the reality of the writing is maybe better, whether you think so or not. Yeah, even though the writing was good to begin with, obviously award-winning level good, you still get better with that practice because you're writing those subconscious routines every time you're sitting down, pounding away on the keys.
Yeah. I think if I've learned anything, it's just how the process works for me. And I don't think that's something that we decide. It's
No,
something that we accept.
right.
And
And you try
like,
different methods, right? Because
right.
you don't know, like
And you've got
outlining
to,
versus pantsing and that kind of stuff.
right, figuring it out. And like one of the things I learned, and by my third book, I was like, okay, this is a thing, is that I'll be writing along and I'll have a character who's just a minor character, maybe the necessary neighbor across the street or something, that will start kind of tapping on the computer screen. Like, I have something more to do here.
Huh.
And whatever that instinct is, whatever drives it, it's happened with every book. And I learn to listen to that.
Right.
So I save myself a little time, maybe.
So
Um,
you have a minor character that you've already been thinking about, but they turn out to be a little bit more pivotal than what you had kind of originally envisioned for them.
yeah, that they
Yeah, I
will
see.
come in and they will in some way drive plot points.
Got
They
it.
have a bigger role.
Right.
Um, is what is what they're is what they're telling me when they start knocking on the screen.
Which is good, right? Because you don't want to just be introducing characters willy-nilly and then they just dissolve and we don't hear anything about it. Every character should I love, even if it's a minor character, I love thinking about like what's this person's story. Even if I don't even relay it, you know, they need to be interesting. They need to have this weird kind of thing about them that's unexpected, even if it's just a waiter serving
Yeah,
somebody, because that makes it
yeah,
more fun.
yeah.
Um,
If they're coming on screen, they got to be there for a reason.
right,
Yeah,
right. And they can't just be the one person who is the proxy for the audience so things can be explained to them so now the audience knows, because that's always a rough balance, I think, when I'm doing that, because sometimes you do want to have information conveyed and it's easy to have it conveyed to a character who doesn't know, but it's so easy for it to sound ham-handed if it's not handled really like delicately.
yeah,
And that took me a while to learn too. I'm like, oh, the audience can figure this out. The audience is way smarter than you're giving them credit for. You can throw them into a scene that's just chaos and confusion, and if they're interested, they'll get to the point where they figure it out. You don't have to explain everything to them. Um,
yeah,
that took me a while to figure out.
yeah, yeah. That information dump is what I call that.
Yeah,
Um,
totally, totally.
that we're always on the lookout for. Sure.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and if you read a lot of mysteries or thrillers or suspense, it's those first 20 pages. And if those first 20 pages are full of backstory, and which is
Mhm.
tough, I think, I don't write series, but when you're writing a series and you have to kind of include some of that so people can get grounded, um, it's really easy to get to lose propulsion because you want to know immediately, like, what is the threat, what is the big moment that
Yeah.
is going to set the stage. And sometimes it can even be a mood or the way people look at each other, and that can build
Mhm.
tension. But if it's just, okay, here's 5 characters in the first 3 pages that I've got to figure out who they are, i, I could very well put that book down.
You're, I'm getting ready to turn up my next book in, and my anxiety level's going like this as you're
Oh
talking.
no.
Like, oh, what are my first 20 pages doing?
I
Um,
know. And don't you lose total context for it as you're like, For me, it's about 60, 70% in the book. I'm still excited about the book. I'm starting to think about how it might end, but a lot of it I'm like, I have no idea. This feels like a piece of shit book to me, but I don't know. And maybe I've shared a few chapters with my critique group. Maybe my agent has seen my first 100 pages if I've chosen to do that. Well, yeah, I mean, the first person after my partner reads it and edits it, the first person who sees it is my agent, and it's like 3 weeks of just like somebody who's your greatest ally. I'm like, she's going to hate it.
Yeah,
You just don't know, right?
it is hard to it's hard to know. I find that if I'm falling in love with the characters, which I don't do easily, like,
Yeah,
I'm not the kind of person that walks in a cocktail party and meets everybody in 10 minutes.
yeah,
I'm a little more reserved, and it's the
yeah,
same in my writing. It takes me a while to really fall in love with the characters, but if I start to feel that, and once I'm in that world, then I start feeling a little better that maybe this is okay.
yeah.
We'll see.
But and you could still be wrong. Like the things you hate could be some of your best-selling stuff. And
Here goes the anxiety level.
I know, sorry. Do you write? Because I only write standalones, and so my kind of barometer sometimes is when I finish a book and I have this inkling, I'm like, I kind of want to keep writing about this person. I feel like that's a good sign for me. And when people ask you one of the questions that I hate, which is which one of your books is your favorite, which I
Oh,
never know how to answer, and I've been asked it so many times, but I do think about like which character did I miss writing afterwards? And does that mean that was my favorite? Maybe that means that was my favorite book. Are you all standalone novels?
I am all standalones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my book that just came out, that's out now, Lake County, that one, for whatever reason, and I have no idea why, I wrote it exceptionally fast for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of, my first several books, it was a book every couple of years. And I've written a couple in a year. Lake County, I wrote in under 6 months.
Great.
It just, it just, I couldn't type fast enough. So that was my favorite process. For whatever reason that happened, like I said, I don't know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It
wish
just
they
it just
all were
clicked.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish they were all that way. I would love to replicate that. And um, I don't know. Again, it's just that you just got to go with what works for you. You can't pick that.
Yeah. And I think you're right when you're talking about, a lot of writing is figuring out just what works for you over time. And you will, and I think you do get into a comfort level at some point, and I think those things include a big one for sure is point of view. Like you start to realize like what point of view just is organic to you, and that takes a long time.
Mhm.
And to me it ended up being my fifth book maybe, where I finally did first person present tense single character the entire book, and it just flowed. I'm like, why is this so easy for me to write?
Yeah.
And every book since then, first person present, usually from a female
Okay.
perspective. And I'm like, but it took me 5 books to figure that out.
Hmm.
You know, sentence structure, chapter length. When you kind of get to, or outlining versus pantsing, when you get to the point of just like, all right, I've done this enough where be confident enough that you know what you're doing, and then strip all that away and just do what comes to you and see what that is. You get a book that you write in 6 months, I think. Did
Yeah.
you do something different with this book that with Lake County that made it maybe write a little bit faster? Had you visualized more of the story already?
Um, Not really. I had, and I've written, like for example, Lake County set in the past. I've written books set in the past. I've written books set in the present. Um, Lake County is a mixture of point of views because I have multiple point of views in the book. So there's a first
Hmm.
person, there's a couple of third persons. Um, so yeah, I really don't know
Yeah. Yeah.
um, what it was, but the characters were just very ready to hit the page. And
Yeah.
it's another one of those weird things that accountants don't like to think about. Like, why are some characters easier to write than others? Or, it all gets a little too, I don't know what the word eccentric. So I
Yeah.
don't really think about it. I just do it.
Yeah. And I think some of them are just some things, and I tend to write somewhat visually. Like I can see it all in my head. Like I'm watching a Netflix series, which makes it a little bit easier. But sometimes there's even added clarity to that where you're just like, even if I can't even tell you exactly what my protagonist looks like, I can tell you how she's standing, how she kind of glances at, and the more that I visualize them clearly in my head, then it's faster writing because it's not that they take over, because that's a little precious. I think when people kind of say, I
Yeah.
just sit back and let the characters talk to me. All right, calm down. But there are moments where you're just kind of like, I just see this all. And this is, of course, this is what she would say. It's so it just kind of starts flowing. And on your sixth book, you're a stronger writer. You've written so much that the physical act of writing becomes easier, right? Because I think the first books, man, it was like hand to hand combat trying to craft a sentence. It was like one sentence, I'm like, this sounds
Yeah.
terrible. And after a while, you're like, all right, I know how to write. I just need to know
Yeah.
what the story is. Am I
Yes.
increasing anxiety for you still?
Yeah. Well, I have the weekend and that's it. So I
Oh,
better hope
wow.
it's not as bad as I'm feeling right now. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I think you get better at just knowing how things work for you. I feel like I'm a little better with structure.
Yeah.
Um, I have spent a lot of time studying screenwriting
Oh, okay.
because it
That helps with
is
dialogue.
it helps with dialogue for sure, and it helps with structure for the writers out there, people wanting to write. Um, it helps with, understanding what propels a story, what keeps it moving. You learn about escalating stakes and inciting incidents and key events and, um, the three-act structure. And, again, just exercising those skills. It's not that I structure my books on a board or anything like that. I write just pantsing it.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
but I've got those parts of the craft always in my head.
Yeah,
I understand how to structure a scene so that, it has a beginning, a middle, and end. Every paragraph has a beginning, a middle, and end,
right. Right.
even down to the sentence, like what part of the sentence comes first or second. Those things start to become a little more, natural, that's just how you do it.
Right. It's a rhythm. Um,
Mhm.
and every sentence has to be additive uh to the story. But I think what stops a lot of people also is them, you know, thinking about that too much during the first draft.
Oh, yeah.
Because all of that can be gutted, and it should be gutted as you go through the editing. But the hardest thing to do is to write that first draft. And so many people are like,
Oh,
oh, it's
yeah.
not perfect. And then they just never finish it. Um, because I think if I start thinking about three act structure, hero's journey, for example, is my protagonist changing? I don't think about that at all, because that will stop me in my tracks. Sometimes I'll have a sense of like, there should be something else happening soon that injects an additional level of paranoia to my character, for example.
Mhm.
And that's more of a sense rather than like, this is what good books do. But I think you read enough good books and you write enough, that is written into your subconscious, where hopefully it will
Yeah.
come out during the writing process.
Yeah.
Um,
Hopefully.
And you've also gone through a change because now you're with Thomas and Mercer, is that right? Or like,
Yes.
yeah. So that's got to be a trip too, being like, oh my God, I have 3,000 reviews before my book even releases.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
Um,
whole different thing.
yeah, and they have been great.
Yeah, I've
Um,
I've heard great things.
yes, as a writer, I mean, of course, you for sure really value all the marketing support of the
Yeah, they
book
throw it up
because
on the front
that's
page of Amazon. That never hurts.
well, yeah, it doesn't hurt at all. But I also even, before any of that can happen, I've had great editorial support.
Mhm.
And people I've worked with have been so in tune with what I'm trying to do.
Oh,
Or and I'm thinking they're doing that with every writer they work with, and we're all different. And they've been just so great about, what changes in the structure can make the story even better. And um, so yeah, all around great experience.
yeah. I mean, they're doing it with every writer as they should, as any editor
Mhm.
should. But the reality of it is they accept very few writers.
Oh,
So it's a very like being an editorial director, like what a brutal job. Like because you're really going in and giving your own vision to it, but you're not making those changes and you're just making suggestions and
mhm.
and you're doing it with multiple authors at the same time. And I have such respect for for editors because it just seems like a terrifically difficult thing to do, but they love it and they're good at it. And
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
these editorial letters that are brutalizing and but if you switch your attitude, you're like, I can't wait to make my book better because of these amazing comments. Yeah, it's going to
yeah,
be 2 or 3 months of work, but
yep,
I'm so grateful that somebody is, you know, if they just said, yeah, it looks fine, you would feel pretty shortchanged, I think.
yeah. No, that's it. So yes, it's been a great experience, and getting ready to, start that process over as I turn this next book in. And um,
So
so yeah,
this one that you're turning in is already sold.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So then you get the public. Hey, yeah, my next one now, I'm just today posted the cover of it because I'm like, all right, now we're
yeah,
starting this whole, my last one just came out in April. I'm like, all right, now we got to start the PR marketing kickoff call. And
yeah,
it's a lot.
yeah, yeah. The social media. I really respect authors who are so, and I know they work really hard at it, and it seems so effortless, but that it's such an important part of it. And
It is.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, I
It, it,
try to
it's
try to
imp-
do it. Yeah.
it's important, and it's also like it's easy to not do well. And so it's, you do have to kind of look at people who do it well and try to figure that out.
Yeah.
Um, and even then, some of the best advice I ever got was from my PR team who told me, like, you don't have to do everything. Like,
Yeah.
here are all the things you should be doing. You don't have to do them all. Just relax,
Yeah.
find what you like, if there's any of this that you like, and find what maybe you're good at and stick with those things. And even if that's Facebook or something that maybe isn't the best platform, as long as you're doing something, as long as you have a presence, and as long as you're not just spitting out,
Yeah.
buy my book every post, because you see those accounts too and you're like, all right, we get it.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
congratulations on your recent book, and we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do our storytelling part, which as
Okay.
somebody who is self-professed a little introverted, I'm sure you're very excited about this part. But it's
Very
good.
excited.
It's always fun. I've picked 3 books at random from my bookshelf. You're going to choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random page and a random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence, and after I read that sentence, we're going to craft maybe a 2 minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence, then you give me the next sentence wherever you think it should go. I'll do a sentence. We'll just exchange back and forth, and we'll have fun with it. I've
Okay.
got Ali Land's "Good Me, Bad Me."
Okay.
Darcy Coates' From Below, and Greg Iles' Cemetery Road. So choose one of those.
Let's go with Greg Iles.
Yeah, great writer. So give me a page between 1 and 600.
Oh, 237.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly scan page 237 and find a sentence. It's a lot of dialogue on this page. Let's see. So somebody is talking to somebody named Jack. So I'm going to read you one piece of dialogue of this person who's talking to Jack, and you do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
That was a long time ago, Jack.
If I could tell you what really happened, I would, but I really can't remember.
I didn't like how quickly Jack was. Oh, no, I'm Jack. I didn't like how quickly Trevor was dismissing this whole situation. Sheila was dead, and no man, and he could pretend not to remember all the details of it, but it didn't change the fact that we would never see her again.
Okay, so who am I?
So um you're Trevor.
Trevor? Okay. Um, you think her death was easy for me, but it wasn't. I've tried many ways to remember. I've sought medical care. I've even tried hypnosis. But I'm telling you, I wasn't there. And if I wasn't there, I can't remember.
It was all bullshit. I knew it was bullshit. And I also knew that I shouldn't have come here with as much alcohol in my system as I currently had. This was all a complete mistake. But still, I couldn't help feeling the burning metal of my pocket knife in my right front pocket. Why had I even brought this thing?
So now I'm going to switch and continue.
Whoever you want to be.
the- Um, I'm going to leave now and wait to see if Trevor follows me.
I left and he didn't follow. And as I stood outside the door, rage welled within me. How could he not care? How could he not come after me at all? It was one of those moments in the middle of the night where there was a definitive turning point. I could either walk back inside, do what I'd come to do, or I could just leave.
Or I could just leave.
Or we can call it there and leave a cliffhanger.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking he has seen his kind of change in character where he was ready to knife the guy and now he's resigned himself to going home with no resolution.
Right. And I love the idea. I love the idea. Those are these great emotional moments when you're writing, is when you have a character who is on a cusp, and when they have this awareness, this very, maybe it's a watery vague awareness, but an awareness of that, hey, whatever I decide in the next minute is going to be life changing one way or another. Um, and
Yeah.
just when you have that gravity in a scene, and maybe even you as a writer don't know what decision that they're going to make. And that's exciting too,
Yeah.
because you're like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. And then what? Yeah. Well, I think that's part of why maybe we gravitate toward crime fiction, or why I do, because it allows me to put the characters in their greatest stakes of their life.
Right.
Like it's
Right.
they're tested. This is the greatest test of their lives.
Right. And
this
and
moment.
to make characters in those extreme circumstances still utterly vulnerable and human, that's the my favorite part, because that's you saying, what would I do in this situation? And a lot of times you're like, I honestly don't know what I would do. But I might do this. And you write that scene, you're like, oh my God, that has terrible consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can bring that emotion forward and not have them be these impervious, killing machines who, are so brave that nothing ever bad happens to them, then it becomes really fascinating, because you are just all writing about the human condition, which all your readers are.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
that's true.
well,
Very
great
true.
talking to you. Congratulations on your recent release. It looks wonderful, and
Okay.
my fingers will be crossed as you send off this next manuscript. I think all good things are
Thank you
going to
so
happen.
much. It's been
Good
great
talking to
chatting.
you. Take care,
All
Lori.
right.
So that's it. That is my conversation with author Lori Roy. Her latest release is Lake County, and you can learn more about the book and about Lori at loriroy.com. And while you're online, pop on over to Carter Wilson. You can check out my books, look at my events, read my blog, sign up for my newsletter, all that good stuff. And you can also pop over to unboundwriter.com, where you can read more about my retreats, my coaching services, and my online writing classes. All right, folks, that's it for now. Another episode of Making It Up will be out just next week. As always, thank you so much for viewing and or listening. Take care.